our training, and we met some of our members. And throughout the 15 members, we have not, or at least I have not personally meet all of them, because as I said, the members are from Sumatra, Java. I think there's also one in Sulawesi, and then is East Nusa Tenggara. Now let's talk about the sexual violence crimes. But first, I would like to, in order to understand it, I would like first to share the context behind, or the context surrounding the sexual violence crimes law. And I think I would like to start through a timeline. So it was passed in the House of Representatives in the 12th of April last year, but the story goes far back in time. And let me take you back 25 years ago in 1998. Indonesia experienced a transition of power from the new order regime to reformation. And then during that transition of power, there was conflict. There was riots everywhere, and then where conflict happened, usually there will be a rise of gender-based violence as part of the conflict, and the victims, or the ones that were impacted the most by the conflict and the riots, were Chinese Indonesian women. And during that time, the findings were clear that what they experienced are not only just sexual violence here and there, but the sexual violence actually happened systemically. And then from then on, investigation happened, and then the discussion, the talks, and the efforts to introduce legal framework to protect against specific forms of gender-based violence started to happen. 1998 to 2012. There were many legal frameworks to protect against specific forms of GBV, and including sexual violence as well. So we have the presidential instruction on gender mainstreaming. We have elimination of domestic violence law. We have child protection law, and the Indonesian government also has an infamous, I would say, law on pornography, which initially, or it actually had the spirit of protecting victims of gender-based violence in the context of pornography, but in its implementation, a lot of victims who were recorded without their consent into pornographic materials instead are being criminalized. But it's important to note that there were many efforts to protect and to provide support for gender-based violence victims, but a specific form of protection for sexual violence crimes or sexual violent acts was not available. For example, in the criminal code, oftentimes a lot of victims and survivors cannot get the protection that they need from the criminal code. So then in 2012 until 2022, the discussion for an encompassing legal framework for sexual violence started to happen, started from communities, started from several government or state institutions, and the discussion went back and forth, I would say, because since the bill was introduced in the House of Representatives in 2016, it was initially not called the Law on Sexual Violence Crimes. It was initially called at first as the Elimination of Sexual Violence. So the perspective was, or the spirit of that bill that was proposed was to eliminate all forms of sexual violence. So that includes the prevention, the protection for victims. That the two things are the spirits of what was introduced back in 2016. But then there were discussions on how we could really best serve victims of sexual violence and prevent sexual violence from happening. And therefore, in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, or 2022, the naming of the law was changed, or the naming of the bill was changed into sexual violence crimes. There were certain certain discussions as well, or certain worries as well as how the naming sounds sexual violence crimes. There were fears that it might be focused heavily on punishment rather than recovery for victims. But what we were fortunate enough, I think, that the law actually finally covers the victims of the rights of the victims, and we'll talk about it later. And then let's talk about another context. Let's talk about data. 1 in 3 women aged 15 and 64 experience violence in their lifetime. 1 in 10 women aged 15 to 64 experienced violence in the past 12 months. And the National Commission on Violence Against Women identifies 15 forms of sexual violence. This was actually, this identification was started up, if I'm not mistaken, in 2009. So that was also part of the discussion why sexual violence, a law that discusses or that protects or that encompasses sexual violence crimes matters. Today, I happen to also be wearing another data. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, setiap 2 jam, 3 perempuan alami kekerasan seksual. Every 2 hours, 3 women experiences sexual violence. So that is the rate that we are currently having right now, or in the past few decades, I would say. And that's why the sexual violence crimes is really important and it's really needed. Now let's talk about the categories of sexual violence crimes. I think this is important to know, for everyone to know. This is the definition of what is sexual violence crime. So perhaps we can recognize an act as a sexual violence, but which one of those are considered or constituted as a crime? So when it comes to crime, it means it involves punishment, it involves penalty, and so on and so forth. So this is the definition. I think it's in the first article. Not, I forgot which article it is, but it's one of it's in one of the first articles that defines sexual violence crimes. So there are 3 categories of 3 larger categories of sexual violence. So there are sexual violence crimes that are stipulated or that is mentioned in this law. And then there are also sexual violence crimes that is stipulated or it is covered in other laws. And there are also sexual violence crimes that are stipulated in other regulations. So let's see. There are 19 forms of sexual violence crimes, but we like to call it 10 plus 9 because the sexual violence crime law introduces 9 to 10 forms of sexual violence crimes that have not existed in other previous or existing laws. And there are 9 forms that already existed in other laws. So I think you can read it. 1 to 9. Number 1 is non-physical sexual harassment. So this is anything that can be said verbally or certain eye contacts that were intended to dehumanize or look down upon a person based on their sexuality. And then number 2, there's physical sexual harassment. So any forms of touching, groping, unwanted touches that are sexual in nature are part of a sexual violence crime. And then there's also forced contraception. This happens a lot in a number of vulnerable communities. such as disabled women. They are facing forced contraception, and also people or women with HIV. They are also subjected to forced contraception, and now they are being protected because it is recognized as part of a sexual violence crime. And then there's also forced marriage, where it happens in a lot of traditions and cultures where uh, people, especially women, do not have their own choice uh, how, to whom, or when they get married. For example, a rape victim might be forced to marry the perpetrator or the person who raped her. So that that's a, that scenario, that situation, forced marriage is part of a sexual violence crime. And then there's also sexual torture, sexual exploitation, sexual slavery. I think number 9 is important, electronics-based sexual crimes. We have seen this rising since, especially during the pandemic, where everything is conducted online, and then are there's a rising number of electronics-based sexual crimes, such as someone's intimate moment is being captured or being taken without their consent, or being shared, or private or intimate images being shared without their permission or their consent. This is also protected and recognized in the law. And number 10 is actually not a specific form of sexual violence, but the SPC law recognizes that anyone who tries to obstruct the justice procedure in processing sexual violence crimes can be charged with SPC law. So it means, for example, a person is reporting a sexual violence that they experience, and perhaps the perpetrator or other people try to stop or try to hinder the process. That person can be charged with this SPC law. And there are also forms of sexual violence crimes that are already existed or that exist outside of sexual violence crimes law, such as rape. It is it is mentioned in the criminal code. Lewd behavior also in the criminal code. Statutory rape, or rape towards children, so where the children are the victim. It is protected in child protection law. Non-consensual immoral sexual acts, pornography that involves child or involves violence, forced prostitution in human trafficking law, sexual exploitation in terms of human trafficking, domestic sexual violence. So I think I mentioned earlier that one of the efforts to protect against sexual violence is already existed in the elimination of domestic violence law. So this includes that, and then sexual violence related to money laundering. So this encompasses a lot of things. So it encompasses sexual violence that happens in the public sphere, in the private sphere, in relation to other forms of crime, such as human trafficking, such as money laundering, such as pornography. So the sexual violence crimes recognizes that. And why is it specifically mentioned? Because these 9 forms outside of the SPC law should be treated through the SPC law procedural law. So the procedures to process these 9 forms should follow the procedures that are mentioned in this law. And then there are other forms of crimes that are stipulated as SPC, because we wouldn't know what the future forms of gender-based violence or sexual violence could happen, as we can see during the pandemic that online-based or digital sexual violence happened. So the SVC law tries to encompasses other forms of sexual violence that may not be mentioned in detail on the SVC law, but should something should a new form recognize that should that new form of violence or violence crimes should follow the procedures of the SVC law. Another example is the criminal code that will be effective in 2026, the new one. There are 19 articles that regulate SVCs and including its forms and additional sanctions. And also we have a law on the elimination of racial and ethnic discrimination. Should there be discrimination discrimination that are sexual violent in nature, should also follow the procedures that is written in the law, in this SVC law. Okay, so let's move to the next part. There are 6 key elements in the sexual violence crimes law. It is a bit lengthy. I try to make it as short as possible. So the first key element is the criminal act. I mentioned earlier the categories, the forms, we discussed that. And the second element is punishment. So the punishment here, the punishment element in the SVC law or in the TPKS law utilizes double track system. So what that means is that not only the perpetrator will get criminal sanctions or not only will they be punished through imprisonment, but they at times they will be obligated to other forms of sanctions or other forms of punishments, such as additional criminal sanctions. For example, if the perpetrator is a father and the victim is a child, there will be additional criminal sanction. And then there are also measures and obligations that perpetrators have to go through. For example, they have to pay restitutions to the victim, or the perpetrators have to go through social rehabilitation. So what this means is that it does not only punish, it is not only aimed for punishment, but the ultimate goal is that the victims feels that they get closer to justice and they get closer to recover. And by recover, I mean return to the situation before they receive or they experience sexual violence. So that this means the perpetrator has to pay restitution. We make sure that the perpetrators acknowledges what happened, the harm that they have caused. They get lessons, they get rehabilitations to understand and to stop the cycle of violence happening. And then another element is procedural law. So I mentioned the SVC law has a specific procedural law that is aimed for to uphold the victim's rights. So it becomes easier for victims to report. And then there are requirements that are specific to law enforcement apparatus. So they have to go through certain trainings and certain certifications in order to handle cases such as sexual violence crimes, and they receive restitution or compensation. So restitution means from the perpetrator to the victim. Meanwhile, compensation is given by the state for the victim. And then the procedure becomes more inclusive and more sensitive, and all in all reduces victims' burden. So reporting a crime is a very difficult task to do. So the SVC law recognizes that and tries to make the procedures of doing that easier for the victim. Let's talk about the remaining 3 key elements. Victims' rights. Yeah. So the rights not only it's not only the victims that are entitled to a specific number of rights, but also their families, the witnesses. So they are in the process of handling. For example, they are provided legal, psychological, and medical services, including if there are special needs, not only the victims, but also the witness, the family, so on and so forth, the people who are affected by the sexual violence crime, and then also protections. Oh, I forgot to mention the victim. I think it's important to know that the victim also has a right to be forgotten. This is a case where electronics based sexual crimes, for example, uh, sharing of non-consensual intimate images might be shared on social media or whatever, but since they have the right to be forgotten, the government will provide ways for those contents, for those digital contents, for those intimate contents to be taken down from websites so that there will be no more traces of those images that are being shared without their consent. And this is done by the Ministry of Communication, Technology, and Information, if I'm not mistaken. And then also the right to protection. Important to note also the protection regarding their identity, their rights to employment, education, and politics. I mentioned that reporting and processing a crime is a difficult and long task. A person might have to have a leave of absence, might have to leave work for that. And the sexual violence crimes protects so that people will not be fired from their job when they have to go through this process in order for them to receive justice and to receive recovery. And of course, the right to recovery encompassing medical, mental, social restitution, and reintegration. Another element, or the fifth element, is prevention. So this is the task for everyone, or and in any forms or any in each and any kind of way, from education to governance, social welfare, the culture, religious beliefs. This means religious teachings that prevent sexual violence, and then also prevention with special attention to conflict situations, catastrophe, geography, or specific situations. So, as I mentioned earlier, in 1998, a conflict happened, and during conflict, women, especially, and other groups of people are vulnerable to gender-based violence. So the prevention is to take into account how we could prevent sexual violence to happen during conflict. Another element, or the sixth element, the final element, is monitoring. This is conducted by the Minister of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, and also mandated towards national human rights institution. So we have human rights institution for women, for child protection, for persons with disabilities. We have witness and victim protection agencies. So all of these institutions work together to monitor the implementation of this law. Okay, let's go back a bit to the people and their role. So again, I said, SVC law calls for everyone's participation in preventing and handling sexual violence crimes. At least there are three parties involved: the law enforcement apparatus, obviously. They have to apply victim-centered approach in handling cases, coordinating with several parties, and then service providers also have to coordinate with law enforcement. And then the community, they have to create a safe environment, and they also have an obligation to inform if a sexual violence happens. And of course, they also have to monitor the execution of the law. Okay, now I only have 3 minutes left, but let's talk about the most difficult part, implementation and procedures. I think we can also discuss about it later. I think I will skip this. I just want to let you know that the SPC law does not stand on its own. It needs implementing regulations, and we are still waiting for that. So there will be 7 implementing regulations, but despite all of that, all state apparatus still have to apply the SPC law in treating and handling sexual violence cases. So, and there's also integrated criminal justice system. So, the criminal justice system has to be based on the fulfillment of victims' rights. So, from the police, the prosecutor's office, to the court, they all have to fulfill victims' rights throughout the process. I'm gonna skip this. The government roles. There are certain ministries that handle specific areas. So I think the important question is like what to do, or where should the victims of sexual violence crimes go to report? I would say there are 3 main or first points of reporting. You can report to the nearest UPTD PPA or government service providers. You could also report to the nearest community-based service provider, or to the nearest Polres or county police. So make sure that when you're reporting a sexual violence crimes, you report it to Polres. So because they have they are the ones who have the capacity to handle sexual violence crime victims. I'm also sharing some important contacts. Yeah, so the chain of reporting and handling is actually a bit confusing. This is just one of the pictures that I have, painting a picture of how reporting and handling happens. But what I'm trying to say is that there are many parties that involved in the pursuit of justice and recovery. Police, service centers, lawyers or case workers, safe houses and shelters, prosecutors, the court, the national human rights institutions, the hospitals, and psychological aid providers, up until the corrections office or the prison. Perhaps I could have like 1 or 2 minutes additional time where I would like to talk a bit about the situation of refugees. Here I'm citing a quote from the chairperson of the National Commission on Violence Against Women. To this day, the Foreign Refugee and Trafficking Handling Desk has yet to perform optimally in handling cases and still faces uncertainty on the field due to operational constraints. Operational constraints is the key word here, because on the next slide, I mentioned the legal framework is there, although perhaps not quite sufficient, but the current situation paints a different picture. For example, the UPTD PPA, there are certain UPTD PPA that does not accept foreign refugees who are survivors of gender-based violence. And the reason is that their budget are specifically allocated for Indonesian survivors. So I don't know why they only allocate that budget only for Indonesian survivors. As far to my knowledge, there is no legal, or there is no framework that allows for this sort of discrimination. But although the law does not discriminate, the implementation and the practice can be discriminating. And then also there are reports where sexual intercourse, law enforcement officials demanded sexual intercourse in exchange for safety. So if this happens in 2002, afterwards, this can be viewed as sexual exploitation, and that law enforcement officials can be charged with SVC crimes law. And then, of course, the refugees will be less likely to receive protection from their country of origin's embassy. And I would like to end with some recommendations and something that we can talk about in the discussion. I think we could advocate and build relationship with local state entities like UPTD PPA or integrated service providers, and then with Polres, and then we can also gain support from local community-based service providers such as us from Advokat Gender. We could also appeal to national human rights institutions participating in temporary national preventive mechanisms against torture. There are actually 6 national human rights institutions that are participating in that. And then we can also, at home, or the nearest thing or the easiest thing we could do is to foster peer-based support and preventive measures. I think that's all for me. So let's talk. You can contact me here. Yeah, I think that's all my presentation. I return to Sister Fatima. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Amira, for your presentation. Yes, there is many GBV victims in refugee community as well, who cannot even raise their voice, cannot share their problems or their main problem to anyone. That is because most of the victims from refugee community they didn't receive any response from any office like NGOs, UNHCR, CWS, and because also but unfortunately there is many cases which is hidden in refugee communities. You know, in our community, most of the women and girls like feeling a kind of shame, and they have a kind of problems with their parents, which they cannot share their problems, this kind of problems, like whenever they are facing GBV violence from outsider, from even from their own family members, they have to be quiet, they have to hide the problem that they have. And yes, today, thank you so much for sharing your presentation. It was my first time that I heard from you that online or digital-based sexual violence also recognized as a sexual violence. Therefore, it can be reported to the police as well. So I think it is very important for all of the women and girls in refugee community to know their rights and to have access to the resources to help them or to report them about their problems. Thank you so much. So I want to pass the time to Mr. Anga. If you have something to share, yeah, the time is yours.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think just want to add little points, I guess, because Kak Amira and also Sister Fatima also already shared a very important points regarding sexual violence. Before we go to the discussion session, of course, I believe that there are numbers of things that we can discuss regarding these issues because first I would like to start with the data. I think SUAKA as a legal aid organization has record 6 cases of SGBV throughout the at least the last 3 years. Because we've conduct our legal aid documentations from 2020 until now, and we've recorded 6 cases of SGBV, and mainly it is recorded regarding domestic violence. So yeah, at the beginning, it's very hard to determine any legal basis and legal protections because we don't have any adequate legal basis at the time yet. Even we have domestic violence law, because the marriage relationship between refugees sometimes is not legalized, and recorded by the legal officials. Sometimes it's hard for the police to determine any domestic violence because it requires legal marriage relationship, and it's very hard to determine sexual violence act because we don't have sexual violence law at the time. And even though we have this sexual violence law passed last year, we still see many rooms of improvements, as Kamira also said in the presentations, to protect victims, because more practical legal basis needs to be addressed by the government in terms of more protections. And yeah, that's regarding the data and also the room for improvement in terms of legal protections. And we still need also to talk about non-legal protections, for example, safe houses, basic rights, supports, for example. Um, so there are many rooms of discussions related to this criminal actions of sexual violence. So far in SUAKA's experiences, we've collaborate with CRS and UNHCR because they have SGBV response team. There are also other RLOs, very important to mention Sisterhood. They're also very great at have a great concern about SGBV. They also recently passed an SGBV guide for refugees, which is very important as well. So yeah, collaborating with RLOs, collaborating with refugee communities is also important to address these issues. That's why SUAKA want to conduct this topic of the discussions, because we want to raise the awareness and also to raise community capacities to address regarding the SGBV issues in the community. And responding to what has been shared by Sister Fatima as well, creating safe spaces and secure spaces for the victim is also important, because sometimes the victims from refugee communities, because they have many layers of vulnerabilities. They are sometimes feeling many insecurities to even to share their problems in terms of sexual violence. So yeah, more collaborations and works and efforts to create secure and safe spaces, safe mechanisms for them to report sexual violence is also needed to be addressed by all of us. So yeah, looking forward to the Q&A sessions to also to discuss with other. I know some of the paralegals is also here. Even Sister Fatima is also one of our community-based paralegals. There are also Pak Bartel. There also has experience, of course, regarding assisting their community members. So yeah, maybe we can. I will pass it back to Sister Fatima, and maybe we can continue with the discussion so that we can hear more from the participants here. So yeah, Sister Fatima, I will pass it back to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Now we are in question and answer session. And I invite you all to ask your question. Please raise your hand and mention your name, or you can put your question in chat box. Okay, until the other participants share their questions, I had question from Ms. Amira. So my question is mostly in our community, most of the GBV survivor trying to be quiet, like they are not sharing their problems or whatever happened to them, because even if the girl or the woman share her problem to her mother will suggest to the survivor to be quiet. Don't share your this to others, because the problem or this issue will be will get bigger, or will be a big problem for our family and for your own. So what do you think? What should they do? they have to keep quiet, or they have to go to their resources or to law and share their problems and find solution for that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sister Fatima. Yeah, there is unfortunately still a culture of shame, I would say, where survivors or victims are asked to be quiet. But unfortunately, the people who we feel like we can rely on, the people who we thought would support us, are the ones who are telling us to be quiet. So what we can do is, of course, I would like to talk about this in two areas, right? The first one is the victim, the one experiencing violence. If they cannot get support from their closest circles, their family or their closest friends are telling them to be quiet, they can reach out to community services, like I mentioned, or I think SUAKA or UNHCR also work with CRS, JRS, Sisterhood as well. You can talk to them, and then they will be happy to help you or provide support, the supporting system for the victim. Yeah, so I would say, like, let's move beyond the circle. So let's go to the outer area of the circle, like community-based service providers. I think you can talk to us or report the cases to us as well, and then we will be, by us I mean Advokat Gender, and then we will be in touch with UNHCR, JRS, CRS, and so on to provide support and help the victim. And another thing I would like to address is the supporting system as well. So this supporting system, the families or the mothers and everyone else who are telling the survivors and victims to be quiet should uh, should create a supporting environment, which means that when that person decided that they want to, for example, a woman is experiencing sexual violence and she wants to report it, the family, the supporting system, the inner circle should provide support. And that means uh, uh, taking them to taking them to the police, taking them to see the help that they need, and all in all, and creating a culture of support, creating a supporting system for the victim. So it does not stop, or the sexual violence crimes does not stop, or does not only stop in terms of reporting, but also in preventing, which means, yeah, creating a safe space, creating a supportive environment, creating an environment that prevents sexual violence from happening, and an environment that will make victims and survivors comfortable when they speak up. So I think that those are the two areas where they can uh, where that can be done, I think, Fatima. I think I also would like to answer the question raised from Angga in the chat room. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. The important roles of paralegal or community paralegals in addressing this issue is exactly what I said as the supporting system. They are crucial in creating that support system, because I believe the refugee communities are very close with one another, because they have a shared experience of being a refugee, or perhaps they share the same experience from coming from the same country, for example. Those kinds of relationship, those kinds of bonds are important to make sure that the victims, the survivors, feel safe and feels that uh, they feel confident in making sure that they have the right to seek justice and to pursue justice and to receive protection and to receive all the rights that are mentioned in the SPC law or in any other lost all the human rights that they have. So I think it's important that paralegals or community paralegals are there and to foster or create a personal connection to the victims so that they can feel comfortable, they can feel confident, they can feel brave to go through the process of pursuing justice. I think I would also like to share some of the stories where my collective and I, we received reports from refugees. We have so far 2 reports, one of which is domestic violence and the other is sexual violence. And we were also accompanied by CRS and JRS during that consultation. And we were also being accompanied by a translator who are also a community paralegal. So the victim can feel comfortable talking in their mother tongue, in their own language. So the language barrier becomes a little less of a concern that the victims have, but they can actually ask the important questions like, what can I do? What protections can I get? How long the process can take? And then what we do as community-based service providers, we tell them what they can do, what can be done, what should be done, how long is the process going to take, and then the translator, who happens to also be a paralegal, can talk to the victim in the language that they understand and from a person. Of course, there is this connection when you're talking in your own national or in your mother language, right? So I think that's also important, and that experience, I think, for us is important. The presence of the community-based paralegal or the person with whom the victim share the same experience with is important to be there as part of the supporting system.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome, Angga. If you have any more questions or discussions or experiences that you would like to share, feel free. I believe this is a safe space, although this is being recorded to YouTube as well. I believe this is a safe space to talk about issues, but do keep in mind that the names will be your name will appear on YouTube and to everyone here.
One more question, Sister Amira. If they if this survivor, GBV survivor, faced with a powerful person, like who is in charge of it doesn't happen until now, but I'm it's coming to my mind. That's why I want to share it with you. If he is or she is from the UNHCR who committed to GBV, or from CRS and CWS, or any other person who have power in community, if they committed to the GBV, so is there any kind of resources or any kind of angels to help the poor people who don't have much power to solve their problem?
Yes, that is an interesting and important question. Because as perhaps some of you understand that power relations plays a huge part, plays a huge factor in for sexual violence or gender-based violence to happen. So maybe it had maybe there, hopefully there will be no such cases in the future, but we will never know, and we should keep in mind that these powerful people might be the person who perpetuate sexual violence, or perhaps closing the access to justice that the victims or survivors have. So what you can do is you can report that to, for example, other community legal services. I think if I may share the screen again. Hold on. Let me share the screen again on where you can seek help. These are some resources, right? So, for example, a survivor does not feel confident or brave to talk to UNHCR or CRS or other people who are in power in terms of the relationship with refugees. You can go to the government service providers, you can go to the police, or you can go to community-based service providers. So I think in this case, the best bet would be the community-based service provider, because most of the time we are the community-based service providers, such as Advokat Gender, is part of a network of community-based service providers. So we talk to each other a lot, and then if there's any cases, for example, from refugees, we would work together and to help the victim and find solutions for them. And then there are also important contacts I mentioned here. SAPA 129, you can call 129 or send WhatsApp to a number that is, for me, it's easy to remember, 08-111-129-129. So you can WhatsApp that. Although it's in Bahasa Indonesia, I think a survivor can ask help for that, and because it is coordinated by the government, and they will refer you to the nearest community service, to the nearest service providers. And then you can also go to carilayanan.com, where they list a number of service providers, be it from government or from community-based service, that have been trusted to handle cases of gender-based violence really well. And then you can also contact us or fill in the form. Unfortunately, it's still in Bahasa Indonesia, but we can talk in English, or we can communicate in English. But if you feel more comfortable talking in English, you can just WhatsApp us in this number. Perhaps if you want to screen capture it, you can, and I will also share this presentation with you. So that's what a survivor can do if the powerful persons or the powerful people are not able to help them. You can try to seek help from community organizations outside of what you already know, and then you can find that, for example, through this conversation and discussion. You can contact me, and I will, as I said, the community-based service providers, we form a network, and we will obviously refer you to the community service providers that may be best suited to you to help. So that's what I can answer, Mr. Fatima.
Okay, thank you so much. Dear Amira, we have a question from Victoria. I want to read it. Dear Amira, from your perspective, what suggestion do you have for how NGOs, UNHCR, IOM, and refugee communities work together to better support refugee women experiencing SGBV? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. I think what we're doing here today is one of the examples of how we as a community, as as communities work together to support victims or survivors of gender-based violence or LGBT, especially in refugee communities. In my presentation, again, I'm going to share it. My presentation again. I wrote down some recommendations. This is open for discussion, of course, and I'm not very much. I don't have much knowledge on the issues of refugees, but Angga was very kind enough to give me some key readings. So these are some recommendations in response to your your question, Victoria. What can be done from NGOs, UNHCR, IOM, and refugee communities? Perhaps we can. What we can do together is advocate with the government, of course. NGOs, UNHCR, IOM, refugee communities are always, or they will be expected to work or to meet the governments eventually, right? For example, for advocacy and everything, I think we can advocate. We can do a collaborative advocacy work together with the government. For example, I think that is also the reason why we have some regulations regarding international refugees or foreign refugees taken in place. That's why we have the handling desk. I think we can advocate more into that and to make sure. I think the help desk can work optimally through advocacy work. I think, and I believe UNHCR, IOM, and communities have already done that. And perhaps we can also add the issue of gender or of GBV or SGBV as part of the discussion, because it is part of their rights as refugees. Although Indonesia, to my knowledge, does not have any legal framework that specifically protects refugees. Refugees are still protected by human rights, of course, and we should hold the government accountable for that. And then not only the people who are, or the parties who are doing the advocacy are not just NGOs, UNHCR, IOM, and refugee communities, but also talk or involve community-based service providers, because they can be an ally to amplify the voice or to add into the experiences that is specific for refugee women experiencing SGBV, and also aside from the government, also to national human rights institutions, because Indonesia has ratified the Convention Against Torture, although we have not ratified the optional protocol for that. So we do not have an established national preventive mechanism yet, but I think it is also a good source person or a good resource to have to talk to national human rights institutions regarding the situations of refugees. I think one of the national human rights institution, Komnas Perempuan, has already had talks with refugee communities addressing the situations of refugees. That's why in my presentation earlier, I mentioned also, or I quoted a press release from the National Commission on Violence Against Women, which is a national human rights institution, and they recognize the situations that faced by refugee women. That has to be the task of the government. That should be the government's job to also protect them. But for example, here Komnas Perempuan recognizes there are still constraints, operational constraints, and then through this advocacy, through these discussions, we can see more clearly what are the constraints, what can be done to to lift up these constraints. For example, like the first part here, the allocation only for Indonesian survivors. We could appeal together to the national human rights institutions or to even to the government themselves, because this is UPT-DPPA is under the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. We can talk to them. We can advocate to them to see why certain service providers only allocate their budget for Indonesian survivors. What is the underlying regulations for this, and is this not a discriminatory practice, and how can we support and make sure that there is no discriminatory practices anymore, because the laws in place are not discriminatory, but the practices are still discriminatory. I think that's what I can share. I think hopefully also from this discussion, we can also map the things that we can talk about, or what we can bring to the table in discussing to the government, to the national human rights institution. What are the situations like for women refugees? What are the rights that are not being met? What are the concerns? What are the struggles? I think that's what we can do.
Okay, thank you so much for answering the questions. And if there is no question from the participants, we can close today's session.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Sister Amira, and everybody, Mr. Aga, and all the participants. My name is Dembele Karim. I'm so sorry for my late coming. I was busy. Yeah, I understand everything that Mr. Amira, the questions, and all her explanation and everything concerning JBV. And yeah, I think a few months ago, UNCHR hosted JVB, was it? In person. I was among the participants that attended it. Yeah, so we discussed a lot of things concerning the JVB. Yeah, I don't have much to say, but in as much as in Indonesia here that refugees have no right to work, I think the women, they will still keep falling for the victim, because in a situation where someone cannot work, what do you expect from that person? When a child is born and no one is taking care of that child will be misbehaving, doing things that it don't supposed to. So all the problem is that because of Indonesia government, because it does not allow the refugees here to do anything. So the young women, they will be falling into one thing or the other, like chasing men. Like in my community, there is some women, I don't know how to say it, but they don't have anything to do, or to, in fact, anything to do, especially those that with single girls. They don't have anything to eat, how to feed their child, how to take care of themselves. What do you expect them to do? So some of them go into men. So I don't know about this issue. Also with some men, you can see some of refugees here in Indonesia, some young men, they're running into old women that older than them. Maybe they see it, maybe they can get in something from that person to be able to survive. But if there is something doing like skill or work to learn, all those things won't be happening. So I wish the Indonesian government will look into this matter, because I don't see how someone can live in a life without doing anything. How do you expect that person to survive? That person will be violating some laws, doing some certain things. In many countries, refugees are allowed to do something. Here in Indonesia, since I became a refugee, I have not received any dime. Nobody's supporting me. If tomorrow I find myself, I steal, maybe I steal someone's things to eat, that means that I have violated the laws. But if the country is taking care of me, if the government is taking care of me, then I won't find myself doing all those things that is against law. So those young girls, they need some work. They need to learn some skill, some certain things to enable them live all those things so that they will not violate the laws. So Sister Amira and Mr. Aga, I believe that you people are SUAKA and fighting for human rights. So it is high time that all those organizations that partner with the UN, we stand for refugees and say that this thing is over and talk to the Indonesian government. So many people are committing suicide. Mr. Aga, you can be the witness. You see a lot of people sending you in paralegal group that so person died, so person died. What's the reason? Because they are into frustration. So it is high time the Indonesian government look into this matter and know that refugees are human beings. They are not animals. At least allow them to learn some skill. I myself have gotten somewhere, I've gotten something, one company that want to employ me, but because of the status, they said no. That is how. So this is very, very harmful. It's hurting us badly. So I wish that next year, some laws and some rule and regulation will change. Some of the women refugees here are into prostitution. Reason because that is the only thing they can do to survive, to eat. If you go to Puskmas and ask for medicine, they will only just give you paracetamol or that thing. What about the main thing that is happening to you? By the time the person will think, he will just follow a man or follow somebody to see if he can be able to get a medicine for his child. So all those things are the reason why. So I can say that the Indonesian government are also included in what is happening to we refugees here that falling into some victims and some certain things that is against the law. They should do the right thing. When you born a child and feed that child we have abnormal, should not misbehave. But if you throw him outside there, he'll be acting somehow. So it is high time you people will wake up, very, very wake up, so that by next year, all this rule will have some amendment. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dembele. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Yeah. I completely agree. The refugees are facing difficult situation because they have no rights to earn a living here, to make money here, and then their movements are limited. And then, yeah, as you said, they fall into doing things that are against the law, including prostitution. And prostitution has a really high risk of sexual violence. They can also be criminalized on top of that. So the risk is very high. But thank you for sharing. And I think that's also part of the discussion that the talk that we could help with the government to put more efforts in allowing refugees to have more freedom in their movement, in their ways of earning a living, and so on. Because, of course, they cannot rely on other people, and the resources from other supporting communities, I believe, are limited. But I think each and every refugee person have the right to sustain themselves, to help themselves. I think it's important. It's an important topic of discussion to be brought to the table to the government. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, sister. God bless you.
Thank you so much for answering the question. So if anyone have any question. So if there is no any question, yeah, we will close the discussion, today's discussion. Thank you so much for participating this Zoom meeting. Thank you so much. And thank you so much from Sister Amira to present us today's presentation. And